14 years old, 5 feet 1 inch tall, 95 pounds. So small that the electric chair's straps wouldn't fit around his tiny body. So small that they had to use a Bible as a booster seat for his execution. In 81 days, the state of South Carolina arrested, tried, convicted, and executed George Stinney Jr., the youngest person put to death in America in the 20th century. No lawyer present during his confession, a trial that lasted just 2.5 hours, an all-white jury that deliberated for only 10 minutes. This isn't just a story about injustice. This is the story of how an entire system failed a black child in 1944, and how it took 70 years for anyone to admit they were wrong. Alcolu, South Carolina. 1944. While the world was at war overseas, life in this small sawmill town moved slowly. Black families and white families lived on opposite sides of the railroad tracks, a dividing line that defined everything. George Stinney Jr. was the oldest son of George Sr. and Amy Stinney. By all accounts, he was a good kid, quiet, helpful. He had dreams like any 14-year-old. He worked alongside his father at the local lumber mill and looked after his younger siblings, especially his sister Amy, who was just 7 years old. The Stinney family wasn't wealthy, but they were respected. George Sr. had steady work, and the children were well behaved. On March 23, 1944, George's world was completely normal. By March 24th, his life would be over before it truly began. It was a Thursday afternoon. The sun was shining. Betty June Binnicker, 11 years old, and Mary Emma Thames, 7 years old, climbed onto their bicycles. They were looking for flowers, maypops, the wild passion flowers that grew around Alcolu. At some point during their ride, they passed by George Stinney and his sister Amy, who were tending to the family's cow in a field near the railroad tracks. The two white girls asked if they knew where to find maypops. George said no. That was it, a brief, innocent exchange between children. Betty June and Mary Emma rode away on their bicycles. George and Amy went home. Hours later, the two girls never returned. Search parties were organized. Lanterns flickered through the woods. Voices called out their names into the darkness. The next morning, their bodies were found in a water-filled ditch. Both had been beaten to death. It didn't take long for suspicion to fall on the Stinney family. George and Amy were the last known people to see the girls alive. In 1944 South Carolina, that was more than enough. Within hours of the bodies being discovered, a mob descended on the Stinney home. George Sr. was given a choice that wasn't really a choice at all: leave town immediately or watch his family be lynched. The Stinneys fled, but they couldn't take George with them. He had already been arrested, 14 years old, alone, ripped from his family. Police claimed that George confessed within an hour of being taken into custody. They said he admitted to killing both girls with a railroad spike after they rejected his sexual advances. But here's what you need to understand. There was no written confession, no recording, no lawyer present, no parent present, no witness to verify what was said. Just the word of white police officers against a terrified black child. George's sister Amy, the only alibi witness, was never interviewed. The police never asked her what happened that afternoon because they didn't need to. They already had their suspect. April 24, 1944. Exactly 1 month after the murders, George Stinney Jr. stood trial for his life in Clarendon County Courthouse. The courtroom was packed. Over 1,500 white spectators crammed inside to watch the spectacle. Not a single black person was allowed to sit in the main gallery. George's court-appointed attorney, Charles Plowden, was a tax commissioner running for political office. He called no witnesses. He did not cross-examine the prosecution's witnesses. He presented no evidence. He did not even request a change of venue, despite the obvious hostility of the community. His entire defense lasted less than an hour. The prosecution's case rested on one thing: the alleged confession. No physical evidence linked George to the crime, no fingerprints, no blood evidence. The murder weapon, supposedly a 14-inch railroad spike, was never found. The confession itself was never produced in court. The all-white jury of 12 men didn't seem to mind. After a trial lasting just 2.5 hours, they retreated to deliberate. 10 minutes later, they returned. Guilty, the penalty, death by electrocution. George Stinney Jr., 14 years old, had just become the youngest person sentenced to die in America in over a century. For 81 days, George Stinney Jr. sat on death row in Columbia, South Carolina. He was kept separate from adult prisoners, too young to be housed with them. He spent most of his time alone, reading his Bible and writing letters to his mother. In one letter he wrote, "I am sorry I will never get to see you again." His family tried desperately to save him. They reached out to the NAACP, to newspapers, to anyone who would listen. But in 1944, in the Jim Crow South, a black boy accused of killing white girls had no allies. Governor Olin Johnston received hundreds of letters, both pleas for mercy and demands for execution. He never intervened. The execution date was set for June 16, 1944. On the morning of his execution, George ate his last meal: steak, French fries, and ice cream. He was allowed one final visit with his mother and father. One witness later recalled that George couldn't stop crying. He kept saying he didn't do it. He kept saying he was innocent. At 7:30 p.m., guards came to his cell. The execution chamber at the South Carolina State Penitentiary was built for adults. George Stinney Jr. was not an adult. He walked into the room carrying his Bible, clutching it against his chest like a shield. Witnesses later described him as calm, too young perhaps to fully understand what was about to happen. Then came the final indignity. The electric chair was too big. The straps designed to secure prisoners couldn't be tightened around George's small body. His feet didn't reach the floor, so they placed a Bible beneath him. The same kind of book he'd been reading for comfort was now used as a booster seat for his death. The executioner placed the mask over his face. It was designed for a man. On George, it was so large that it slipped off when the first jolt of electricity hit him. Witnesses saw his face contort. They saw the tears still wet on his cheeks. At 7:30 p.m. on June 16, 1944, George Stinney Jr. was pronounced dead. He had lived 14 years, 6 months, and 5 days. 81 days after his arrest, 51 days after his conviction. His body was taken by his family and buried in an unmarked grave. For decades, George Stinney's story faded into history. Another black life ended by a system designed to destroy it, but some people never forgot. In 2004, a journalist named George Frierson began investigating the case. What he found was devastating. The physical evidence never added up. The railroad spike supposedly used as the murder weapon was never recovered. Medical experts would later point out that a 95-pound boy would have struggled to inflict the kind of damage found on the victims. There were other suspects, adults who were never questioned, whose alibis were never checked. The investigation had begun and ended with George Stinney. Then came the testimony of his siblings. Amy Stinney, George's sister, who had been with him that entire afternoon, came forward. Now in her 70s, she had carried the truth for 6 decades. "I was with George the entire time," she testified. "He never left my sight. We were together from the morning until we went home for dinner. He was innocent." Their brother Charles also testified. "There was no way George could have committed those murders. We know the truth. We've always known." But who was going to listen to black children in 1944? Reverend David Kennedy, who had been present at the execution as a young man, revealed something he had kept secret for years. George's last words. Before the mask was placed over his face, George looked at him and said, "I didn't do it." On December 17, 2014, 70 years after his execution, George Stinney Jr. finally got his day in court. Judge Carmen Mullen of South Carolina reviewed the case. What she found was a catalog of constitutional violations. No effective defense counsel, no meaningful opportunity to cross-examine witnesses, no due process, no justice. In her ruling, Judge Mullen wrote, "I can think of no greater injustice than a violation of one's constitutional rights, which has the effect of depriving a young person, 14 years old, of his life." She vacated George Stinney's conviction. Not a pardon, not a commutation, a complete and total vacation of the verdict. In the eyes of the law, George Stinney Jr. was finally recognized for what he had always been: innocent. His surviving family members wept in the courtroom. Amy, Charles, and their siblings had waited their entire lives for this moment. But the truth remained unchanged. The state of South Carolina had killed a child, and no court ruling could bring him back. George Stinney Jr. would have been 94 years old today. He might have lived to see the civil rights movement, might have watched America elect its first black president, might have held grandchildren in his arms. Instead, he died alone in an electric chair, a Bible beneath him and terror in his heart. His story is not unique. Between 1882 and 1968, over 4,000 African Americans were lynched in the United States. Countless others, like George, were executed by a legal system that viewed black lives as expendable. What makes George's story different is that someone finally listened. It took 70 years. It took family members who refused to give up. It took journalists who asked questions. It took a judge willing to look at the evidence and say, this was wrong. George Stinney Jr. cannot be brought back to life, but his name has been cleared. His truth has been told, and his story serves as a permanent reminder of what happens when justice fails, when fear replaces reason, when racism corrupts every institution designed to protect the innocent. George was 14 years old. He deserved to live. He deserved to grow up. He deserved justice. 70 years too late, he finally got it.